Some video games just feel doomed from the start, whether they were stuck in development hell for like a decade, or a movie tie-in that no one expected to be great, or even one of those video game trailers that just looked way too good to be true.
It felt familiar somehow.
As always, I'm Daniel, and today, 10 games we expected to fail, but are actually amazing. So starting off at number 10, of course, is Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Now, this is a recent one, and the story behind it is less about a publicly troubled development and more about a deep, almost universal sense of disbelief from the gaming community. This was first shown off at the Xbox Game Showcase, and I think pretty much everyone had the same two-stage reaction. It really kind of felt too good to be true. It was stunning and had this absolutely gorgeous Unreal Engine 5 visuals, a unique Bella Pog-inspired art style, and also a frankly mind-blowing premise about a countdown to extinction by a being called the Paintress. And I mean, we've all seen trailers for ambitious indie games that look incredible but then release with janky performance, shallow mechanics, or just don't live up to the visual promise. It was being made by a brand new, completely unknown French studio called Sandfall Interactive, a team of 30 people, and of course this was their debut game, and they went all in to deliver a 60-hour turn-based JRPG with real-time elements like dodges and parries, and have it look and perform like a AAA blockbuster, and like I said, it had all the signs of being too good to be true. Sandfall Interactive was founded by a former Ubisoft dev named Guillaume Brocher, had been working on this as a passion project since 2019, and they absolutely knew what they were doing. The combat is as deep and satisfying as it looked, the performance is rock solid, the story actually delivers on that incredible high-concept premise. It sold over 1 million copies in just 3 days, and even the president of France tweeted about it, celebrating it as a new jewel of French creation. It's such a perfect example of a team having a singular, crystal-clear vision and just executing on it flawlessly against all odds. They proved a lot of people, including me, completely wrong. Next up at number 9, we've got Metroid Prime. Okay, to really get why this game was expected to fail, you have to remember the context. We'd had Super Metroid, which was, of course, a genre-defining game, but then nothing. The entire Nintendo 64 generation came and went without a single new main series Metroid game. Nintendo finally announced that a new Metroid was coming for the GameCube, and it wasn't going to be a 2D side-scroller. It was going to be a first-person game. The immediate assumption was that Nintendo was chasing trends, that they were trying to turn their atmospheric exploration-focused series into a generic, mindless first-person shooter to compete with games like Halo. It felt like a fundamental misunderstanding of what made Metroid the Metroid. The isolation, the sense of discovery, the intricate map design. How could you possibly translate that to a first-person view? And then, to make matters so much worse, we found out it wasn't Nintendo. They had outsourced their beloved IP to a completely new, totally unproven American studio called Retro Studios. And at the time, Retro was a complete mess. They had multiple other projects in development that were burning through money, going nowhere, and getting canceled left and right. The studio was reportedly in a state of total chaos. Nintendo just basically took a beloved 2D Japanese franchise, ignored it for an entire generation, and then brought it back as a first-person game made by an unproven Western studio. Retro called it a first-person adventure, and they meant it. The genius was in the controls. The combat was built around a lock-on system, so it wasn't about twitch reflexes and perfect aim. It was about movement, positioning, and using your abilities. The scan visor forced you to slow down, to observe your surroundings, to read lore, to find weaknesses. It was the spirit of Metroid exploration perfectly translated into 3D. Honestly, Metroid Prime is proof that you can't always judge a book by its cover. Next up at number 8, we have Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.
The core identity of Metal Gear Solid is right there in the tagline, tactical espionage action. It's about hiding in boxes, avoiding guards, and listening to long codec calls about the dangers of nuclear proliferation. So when Konami announced a spin-off that completely removed the stealth and turned Raiden, the controversial protagonist of MGS2, into a high-frequency blade-wielding cyborg ninja in a pure balls-to-the-wall action game, a lot of people were skeptical, to say the least. Originally, this was a Kojima Productions project called Metal Gear Solid Rising, meant to bridge the gap between MGS2 and 4, but they couldn't get the core cut-everything mechanic to feel fun. The project was struggling and was honestly directionless. It got quietly canceled. But Kojima handed the entire project over to Platinum Games, the absolute madmen behind Ninja Gaiden 4, and he basically told them, forget the solid part, forget the stealth, just go nuts with it. And they really did. Platinum Games did what they do best. They created one of the most insane, over-the-top, and brilliant action games. They leaned all the way in. The game they delivered, Revengeance, was the polar opposite. The focus was 100% on blistering, high-speed action. And at the heart of it was the blade mode, making you slow down time and manually slice any enemy or any part of the environment into hundreds of tiny pieces. This was a game where it abandoned the series' conventions, and in doing so, it became a legend. It found a whole new audience that didn't care about the MGS lore, and it was so ridiculously fun that it even won over a lot of the diehard fans who initially wrote it off. It was a spin-off that felt totally unnecessary, born from a failed project that ended up becoming a masterpiece of its genre.
Right, it's on the other side of that barricade.
Up next at number 7 is The Witcher. Believe it or not, the original 2007 release of The Witcher came from a time when the name CD Projekt Red meant absolutely nothing to most people. Today, CD Projekt Red is a global powerhouse of the RPG genre, but back then, they were just a Polish company that mostly distributed and translated video games for their local market. This was their first ever attempt at making a game. The game was based on a series of fantasy novels that were super popular in their home country of Poland, but outside of Poland, nobody had heard of them. The lack of faith was so real that the author of the books famously turned down a deal for a percentage of the profits. He just took a flat cash payment up front because he was that convinced it would go nowhere and ended up selling the entire rights to the Witcher franchise for just $9,500. I mean, the creator of the entire universe didn't think a video game adaptation would be a success. Now, the game itself was janky when it came out. The English voice acting was rough.
This beast is beyond me. Although I know someone else.
Who would that be?
The boy Alvin. He's a strong source and a diviner.
And the combat was this weird rhythm-based clicking thing. It had a steep learning curve, but underneath all that jank was something special. The story was mature, the world was dark and gritty, and the choices you made were genuinely difficult with no clear good or evil answer. It treated the player like an adult. It wasn't a massive overnight blockbuster, but it did way better than anyone expected. It found a dedicated audience on PC, a cult following that loved its ambition. And that success, that little foothold it managed to carve out against all odds, was everything. It was the foundation that CD Projekt Red built their entire empire on. Without this weird, janky Polish RPG succeeding, when it absolutely shouldn't have, and which is typical CD Projekt Red bouncing back after like a kind of rough launch, we never would have gotten one of the greatest RPGs of all time, which is, of course, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt.
Next up at number 6, we have Lies of P. So you know how it is with the Souls-like genre. It's a hardcore fandom, and they are very protective of From Software's formula. We've seen a million clones come and go, most of them not great. So when the first trailer for Lies of P dropped, showing this dark, gothic, Victorian-looking city, the internet was absolutely not kind. It felt like a Bloodborne copy to most people. It looked like they weren't even trying to hide it. The city of Krat looked exactly like Yharnam. The health rally mechanic was there. Even the enemy movements felt familiar. And the premise was a dark, gritty Souls-like based on Pinocchio, honestly making it sound like a gimmick.
a joke, almost. The conversation started to change when it released, and the people who actually played it were all kind of saying the same thing. And it was a game that took its inspiration and then built something new and fantastic on top of it. It introduced its own brilliant mechanics, like the Legion Arms system and the ability to mix and match weapon handles and blades to create your own unique playstyle. And even the story, the Pinocchio fairy tale, was twisted into this genuinely dark, compelling narrative about a lot of things. The combat was great, a perfect hybrid of Bloodborne's speed and Sekiro's emphasis on parrying, and it led to some of the best designed boss fights in the genre. This was from a relatively unknown Korean studio, NeoWiz, and they made a really good Souls-like game, which we don't really see a lot of these days. With that being said, Lies of P went from being ridiculed as a cheap copy to being hailed as a masterpiece, a huge hit that absolutely nobody saw coming.
Son.
Coming in at number 5 is the 2016 reboot of Doom. This game was the very definition of development hell. A sequel to Doom 3 was announced way back in the late 2000s, and then for years of silence and bad rumors. We eventually found out that the original version they were making, a game internally known as Doom 4, was basically a heavily scripted cinematic shooter set on Earth. Fans who saw leaked concepts nicknamed it Call of Doom. And from what we've seen, it was pretty much exactly that. It was slow, it was story-heavy, it was a generic cover-based shooter, it was everything that Doom isn't. The project was such a mess that the studio, ID Software, completely scrapped the entire thing and started over from scratch. After all that waiting and worrying, they finally showed us something concrete, the multiplayer beta. And oh man, it was a disaster for expectations. It was fine, but it felt completely generic. It had loadouts, a 2-up and limit, it felt slow, it felt like a bad Halo clone with a Doom skin. The reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Everyone assumed, well, if this is the multiplayer, the single-player campaign is probably just as soulless and trend-chasing. The hype was completely dead. But then it launched, and the actual game had no big cutscene, no tutorial, just pure, unfiltered aggression. It wasn't a throwback, but like a complete modernization of what made the original great.
Demonic presence at unsafe levels. Lockdown in effect.
They created this concept called push-forward combat. You don't hide behind cover to regain health. You have to be hyper-aggressive, pushing forward and performing these brutal glory kills on enemies to get health and ammo back. It forces you into this beautiful, violent dance of death. It was fast, it was fluid, it was bloody, and it was Doom. It was the polar opposite of what the disastrous beta suggested. A game that had every reason to be a confused generic mess ended up being one of the best first-person shooters ever made. And just like most games on this list, this is a true masterpiece that nobody saw coming.
So up next at number 4, we have Silent Hill 2 Remake. And I have to say, of all the games on this list, this is the one that felt the most sacrilegious, the most doomed. Look, the original Silent Hill 2 is a landmark in psychological horror and video game storytelling. Now, the developer they chose for the remake was Bloober Team, in which they've made some solid horror games like The Medium and Layers of Fear. But their style of horror is very different. It's more direct, more reliant on jump scares and surreal, walk through the spooky house segments. Silent Hill 2's horror is subtle, it's atmospheric. It's about a deep, oppressive sense of melancholy and guilt. The pairing just felt wrong. It felt like a fundamental misunderstanding of the source material. The initial trailers didn't help, with a new look for James that had the forums in a total uproar, and combat that looked way too action-heavy. But it's on this list because somehow, against all of those odds, they pulled it off. And I am glad they did pull it off. Bloober Team clearly knew they were handling something sacred, and they treated it with a level of reverence nobody expected. They understood it. The new over-the-shoulder camera, which everyone feared would turn it into a
should I say, a Resident Evil clone, was used to enhance the claustrophobia, to make you feel more grounded in James's terrifying personal journey. The combat, while more fluid, still felt desperate and clumsy enough to make you feel vulnerable, not empowered. And most importantly, they nailed the atmosphere. The fog of Silent Hill was thicker and more oppressive than ever. The sound design was immaculate, and they preserved the deep psychological subtext that makes the story so timeless. They made a game that was sad. And yeah, of course, that's what Silent Hill 2 is supposed to be. Bloober Team, making a remake of Silent Hill 2, had every single red flag imaginable that looked like a textbook example of a beloved classic being resurrected for a quick buck, and it ended up being a beautiful tribute that did the impossible. It has a very strong 86 on Metacritic and was largely praised by almost everyone. 2024 was a stacked year for games. We had Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, the indie sensation Balatro, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and yet even among all those incredible games, Silent Hill 2 was right there in the conversation, recognized as one of the absolute best games of last year. It was honestly a huge success, and most importantly, a boost in reputation to the developers, Bloober Team.
Coming in at number 3, we have Mad Max. There's a rule when it comes to games based on movies. They suck. I mean, like 90% of the time. They are cheap, rushed-out cash grabs. Avalanche Studios, the folks behind the chaotic sandbox of Just Cause, announced that they were making a Mad Max game, and while it wasn't a direct tie-in to Fury Road, it was strategically set to launch in the same year. The expectation was a big, empty, generic open world with a famous name slapped on it. Mad Max is so much better than it had any right to be. Avalanche nailed the feeling of the wasteland. The world was desolate, oppressive, and yet strangely beautiful. But the real surprise was the gameplay. The hand-to-hand combat was brutal and weighty, which was very clearly inspired by the Arkham games, but it worked perfectly for Max. You've also got the car combat, which is the heart and soul of the game, customizing your car, the magnum opus, with spikes and flamethrowers, and then just ramming into a convoy of war boys, harpooning the wheels off their cars, and watching them explode into a shower of scrap metal was everything you'd want from a Mad Max game. So you have this game that defied all the odds, a licensed title that was actually fantastic, with a great story that fit the lore perfectly. It should have been a massive hit, but then Mad Max launched on the exact same day as Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. MGS5 was one of the most hyped, most anticipated games of the year, and of course Mad Max never stood a chance. And because of that, a lot of people missed out on a truly incredible open-world gem. For the number 2 spot, we've got Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. In Kingdom Battle, you've got Mario, Nintendo's golden goose, I will say, the most iconic, carefully protected character. And on the other side, you have Rabbids. A crossover between these two IPs sounds like a fever dream. The internet did what the internet does. It exploded with negativity. The idea of a Western developer like Ubisoft taking Mario and smashing him together with the Rabbids in a turn-based tactical strategy game like XCOM, it's 3 terrible ideas all rolled into one. E3 happened. Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto came out on Ubisoft's stage to showcase the game for the first time, making the entire narrative shift to realize that this wasn't a soulless cash grab, but rather a passion project. And the game itself was brilliant. It had no right to be, but it was. The gameplay wasn't XCOM for babies. It was a deep, clever, and incredibly satisfying strategy game that brilliantly merged the genre's staples with Mario's unique sense of movement. You were a team jumping off your allies to get extra range, dashing through enemies and warping through pipes. It was acrobatic and aggressive in a way the genre had never really seen before. Everything, including the humor, landed perfectly. The charm, the polish, the brilliant music was all there. And just like you expected,
Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle went from being the internet's #1 joke to being one of the best and most beloved games on the Switch. And finally, at #1, we have GoldenEye 007. First of all, this was a movie tie-in game. Then, as now, that was still basically a curse. Even this was about 30 years from today. Now, Rare was a fantastic developer, but they were known for Donkey Kong Country and Killer Instinct, which were basically bright, colorful, cartoony games. It honestly made no sense for them to make a realistic, gritty first-person shooter. And to even make matters worse, the game was delayed. It was supposed to come out alongside the movie in 1995. It didn't release until the summer of '97, which was almost 2 years later. GoldenEye had a great single-player campaign because it wasn't a mindless shooter. It had varied objectives based on the difficulty setting, it had stealth elements, it had gadgets. It actually made you feel like James Bond. And it even had multiplayer. For a whole generation of gamers, this was the birth of console multiplayer. The concept of 4 friends huddled around a single TV, running around a map and shooting each other, wasn't really a thing on consoles. GoldenEye created that. The split-screen chaos, the arguments over screen looking, the pure unfiltered joy of it. Now, even GoldenEye was on the wrong console. It was the wrong genre, on the wrong console, from the wrong developer, released at the wrong time, but ended up being an absolute masterpiece. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more awesome content. Make sure to turn on those notifications so you never miss an upload. Also, remember to drink some water and get some sun. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.